In this video, I wanted to share the story of my grandfather because when I heard the story the first time, it completely moved me and changed the perspective in which I saw everything, and it really changed how I just approached life in general. And so the one sentence summary is essentially he spent 10 years in this legal battle because someone stole one of his patented technologies, and he spent 10 years battling it out, and in the end he basically lost all of his wealth, all of the family's wealth, but more importantly, he lost his life in the end. And when I heard the story the first time, it wasn't obviously from him because he passed away just shortly after I was born, and he didn't really want to see me because at the time he was very sick and he was scared of passing on any diseases to me. So this is just what I've heard from family members my mom, my dad, and etc. And so basically, starting from the start, he grew up in a very poor family. Basically, that it was people would literally starve. This was back in China, in the small villages, and as you can imagine, starvation was a massive big deal back then. And this was this is back in the 1900s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, and so on. And yeah, it was very rough childhood, and he grew up in a small village, which meant that opportunities were quite rare. But he was a very hard worker. He went to school. He tried his best, and he got really good grades. And eventually, he wanted to join the Air Force, and there was a special course you could enroll in through university to do that. And he met all the criteria except one, which is that he came from a poor background. And so, I mean, honestly, it's sad when I think about it now, which is that you can meet all the criteria, but just because of the physical location in which you're born, you can't pursue this particular opportunity. And I can only imagine how frustrating that would have been, but it didn't stop him. And so he eventually got into other industries, and he got into the like it's not really called the mining industry nowadays it is, but he got a lot into geography and finding where particular crystals are. You know how there's those people, I don't know if it's that common, but people can see the terrain, look at a big plot of land and know exactly where there could be diamonds underneath, or precious metals, or precious crystals underneath, just by looking at the surface. It's incredible skill. But that's what he trained the next for the next many years, if not decades, on, and that's what he got really good at. And so he had this patented technology that would help him filter out all the rocks to find the crystals and all of that. And eventually there was this guy in his company that saw what he was doing, saw the opportunity, and eventually just snaked on him. And he basically took the technology, used it with other companies, or for his own private use. Then once he got called out for it and there was a legal battle, he then bribed the judges and the people with cars with women to basically support him. And my grandfather is he had a very strong sense of justice, and so that was nothing he would not engage in that sort of bribery. And you could argue ultimately that kind of costed him first of all the legal battle. It cost him all his wealth because he spent all his money on the lawsuit for 10 years. It's a very long time. Most of us watching probably spent 10 years in primary school plus high school, so it's a very long time. And eventually, just because of all the stress and all the physical strain, he eventually got cancer and then passed away from that at the end of the legal battle. So obviously he ended up losing the battle. The technology was stolen basically. And yeah, I mean that's not the worst part. The worst part is obviously the fact that he lost his life through this. And it's a very the story was definitely I had many feelings towards it. First of all, my initial reaction was why don't you just stop and just do something else, recoup and stop fighting. But I realized that sometimes that's just the values or the energy that people have. And I thought it was like, it was way too extreme. But when I looked at areas of my own life, obviously there's nothing to the same scale as this. And I'm not saying that, I'm like morally like on a high ground in any sense, but just like small things, like when it comes to just like, let's say, doing a particular study technique, or just, um, just like believing in a certain like thing, or like just any belief that I have. I would sometimes be very stubborn, like in believing that, and I would like basically just refuse to change. And it's kind of like that stubbornness where it's definitely like caught me a few times, because it just means I'm not open minded enough to like change and adapt to the new situation. And so obviously in this case, like it's not the same as stubbornness, so I don't want to like just like reduce it down to that. But to like a certain extent, it's like I just want to stick to like just winning this battle regardless of what it costs. And it's definitely a noble like attitude, like his sense of justice. And that's sometimes like it's interesting because like if he ended up like winning is obviously the best case scenario, but if he ended up like not continuing on with the legal battle and just leave, like sure, he could have been alive, but potentially he could not live with that guilt. And so that's why I had like so many mixed emotions towards this, because it's it's like a very hard decision. And so the reason I wanted to share this with you is because like knowing when to give up is a very hard decision to make. And there's people online saying, you should never give up. But ultimately, like, it's one of those things that, yes, you should try and like push through, be determined, and, not give up, especially when it's like, small things like, let's say studying for exams, you have to like study like 5 hours a day. You just got to push through that. But when it comes to like large things like this, like, when do you like give up? Like, for example, for like me during like med school, when when should I consider like giving up like going to university to pursue something on the side? Is that ever a consideration on the table? Like I've spent so many years, or not so many years, but like 4 years already in university. Should I like do I like fall for the sunk cost fallacy and just continue on, or is it like time to like give up and do something that I'm like actually passionate about? So the like better phrasing that I've kind of seen is like, rather than thinking not like when it's time to give up, I think of it as like knowing when to take one step back so you can go 2 steps forward. So for my case, like taking the gap year, from like just taking a break from university just allows me to have like the like space to try out different things, and then I can always decide to go back to medicine if I want. So that's kind of me like spring forward. But for my grandfather's story, like it's very challenging. Like, do you stop like the legal battle, and then you try and recoup resources, think of the best strategy to go forward, and then do it? It's very hard, especially if you spent like your entire life on this like particular technology, just to have someone like that you trusted steal it. Like it's that's going to keep you awake at night, and it's not going to be like something that's going to easily pass. And so honestly, like that's like the question I have for you watching this right now. Like, when do you know like when to give up? When is the right time to give up? Maybe in this case for my grandfather, that's the best case scenario for him to just try his best and pursue it, even if it meant costing his life. So, as just a question for you, I'm happy to, I'm more than willing to hear your perspective on this, because it's an area that I struggle a lot with, which is knowing when to like step back. So if you have any thoughts on that, please let me know.